The cock crowed thrice. Then came silence, thick and expectant. The kind of silence that hovered before a storm or a song. In the heart of the Yoruba land, somewhere between the green-blooded hills of Ibadan and the sacred groves of Ekiti-Parapo, the village stirred as dawn yawned across the sky like a waking lion. Smoke rose lazily from clay chimneys. Mothers swept doorways, humming tunes older than memory. Children chased goats too clever to be caught, their laughter echoing between the thatched roofs and red mud walls. The scent of boiling yam and dried fish mingled with that of fresh dew. It was a new day, but not an ordinary one. And then, the drums. They did not call for dance today. These were not the drums of celebration or harvest. These were the Kiriji drums, war drums, thick, guttural, ancient. They spoke of vengeance and vision, a warning, a prophecy, a beginning. Orbadele heard them long before he saw the drummers. He sat just outside his father's hut, the blade of his machete resting on a smooth stone, the rhythmic scrape of sharpening echoing the drums. Sparks flicked in the air like mischievous fireflies. He was 25, broad-shouldered, eyes like smoldering coals, and a mouth always a second away from either a proverb or a grin. He tilted his head, listening. 16 years, they said. That's how long the war would last. The Kiriji War, they would call it. A civil storm, not against white men this time, but brother against brother, town against town, in a bid to define what power meant and who could wield it. His mind whispered what his lips would later boast. They said 16 years would break us. Little did they know, it'd forge us into legends. A goat bleated behind him, startled perhaps by the tension in the air or the sudden laugh that burst from Orbadele's throat. War, yes, but even war deserved laughter. Later that morning, under the age-wrinkled baobab tree at the village square, the elders gathered. Some wore solemn expressions, others suspicion. The war was no longer rumor. Scouts confirmed the Fulani-backed forces were tightening their grip, using disunity among the Yoruba like a blade. The debate crackled like dry wood in fire.
We must consolidate. Ekiti, Ijesha, Egba, Ibadan.
Chief Oluwo bellowed.
Words. Talk will not turn spears into thunder.
One old hunter growled. And then, amid the thick cloud of tension, young Kola, son of the village drummer, tripped, spectacularly, over a talking drum. Silence, then a ripple of laughter. Even Chief Oluwo cracked a rare grin, his face creasing like a cracked gourd. Orbadele stepped forward, blade glinting at his hip, voice like the clash of iron on iron.
If war must come, let it find us ready. Let's beat them with rhythm and steel.
The elders paused. The baobab rustled. Something shifted in the air. The war had not yet begun, but history had already started listening. Days later, the rhythm of war broke through the morning stillness, not from the drums, but from the sharp cry of a war horn. The earth trembled, spears struck shields, muskets coughed black smoke into the sky, and Orbadele ran, feet pounding through dust and blood, his machete catching the sun like a flash of warning.
16 years of this. I should have asked for a raise.
Kola grinned, sweat dripping down his nose.
Raise! You should have asked for a wife first.
Orbadele snorted and leapt from cover, machete raised high. He didn't wait for Kola's reply. War didn't wait. War had no manners. He led the charge like a possessed storm, a lion unshackled. Around him, the clang of metal, the crack-pow of muskets, the wet thud of flesh meeting blade. They had attacked before dawn, hoping to surprise the Ibadan camp. But the enemy wasn't green. These were seasoned warriors, armed with European guns and Yoruba cunning. The clearing had become a battlefield fast. Trees felled for cover, red soil churned by feet and blood. Orbadele dodged a spear, parried another. He moved like water over rock, never pausing long enough to die. A man lunged at him. He sidestepped, spun, and drove his machete into the man's gut. Orbadele didn't have time for guilt. Another musket fired, another scream, and then silence, deafening, unnatural. Not because the battle was over, but because something within Orbadele cracked open. A memory. He was 10, his hand small, gripping a wooden staff carved by his father. The old man stood over him like a tree, weathered, proud, eyes that held both kindness and thunder.
Obadale, this land is not just soil, it is memory. It remembers our sweat, our songs, even our sorrows. You will protect it. When I am gone, you will stand.
I promise.
Orbadele whispered.
Then, may Ogun bless your steps.
A horn sounded. The present slammed back in like a door flung open. Orbadele wiped his blade on the grass, chest rising and falling like a blacksmith's bellows. Around him, Ibadan forces were retreating, just a little. Enough to buy them ground, enough to earn another breath.
We didn't die.
Not yet. Not yet.
They collapsed onto a fallen log, drinking water from a shared gourd passed by a wounded comrade. The war did not end that day. It became a song with too many verses, a fire that refused to burn out. Villages crumbled, some to enemy flames, others to hunger. Palm fronds that once shaded children now littered the paths like war trophies. Smoke rose daily, sometimes from cooking fires, more often from homes set ablaze. In smoky huts lit only by oil lamps, alliances were forged. Ekiti-Parapo leaders, Oryo generals, Ijesha war chiefs, they argued, prayed, and plotted over crudely drawn maps. Every ink stain marked a friend gained or a brother lost. Orbadele became more than a warrior. He became a symbol. He spoke less now, but his eyes held the war's weight. He no longer flinched at blood. He started sleeping with one ear open, his hand resting on the machete like a lover's arm. Kola remained by his side, loyal to a fault. He cracked jokes while dressing wounds. He sang off-key during night watch. Once, after narrowly escaping a skirmish, he turned to Orbadele and said,
If I ever become an ancestor, make sure they carve me smiling.
Noted.
Orbadele replied.
But if you get us killed, I'll ask them to carve you without teeth.
Other warriors rose and fell. Ajani the archer lost 3 fingers, but learned to shoot with the other two. Taye, barely 17, who once cried during his first kill, now fought like Shango's child. And Folarke, a nurse-turned-warrior, became legend for saving more lives than death could claim in a day. Each night they gathered, around fires, around memories.
Do you remember the festival of Oshe?
I danced till my knees wept.
And then the laughter would fade, replaced by silence and drum beats, always the drums. By the 5th year, Orbadele bore scars like medals, one on his forearm, another slicing across his shoulder, but the deepest ones were unseen. The quiet look he gave fallen friends, the way he touched the soil before each battle. He still remembered his promise. He still remembered the land. He still fought, not just for victory, but for something no musket could capture. The right to choose, the right to belong. And when the Kiriji drums called again, echoing into another sunrise, he rose, machete in hand, dust on his boots, and that same half-grin playing on his lips. Because legends aren't born, they're carved, battle by battle, heartbeat by heartbeat, until history has no choice but to remember their names. The crackle of flames gave way to a quieter fire, one that lived inside an old man's chest, steady and stubborn. Elder Adebayo sat cross-legged on a raffia mat in the corner of his hut, the warm glow of a swinging lantern carving shadows across his weathered face. The night outside murmured with distant drums and the chirp of crickets. Inside, it was still, except for the soft clink of the cup in his hands and the occasional pop from the fire. A younger man sat across from him, city-trained and soft-palmed, with a small recorder blinking red between them.
So, you were there? The Kiriji War?
Adebayo's lips curved, not quite a smile. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a long sip of warm ogi and stared into the fire like it might flicker out a face he hadn't seen in years.
They asked that question like it was a festival. I was there, yes. But more importantly, I lived past it. That's not the same thing.
The recorder blinked again, waiting.
You want to hear about Obadale? Of course you do. Everyone does now. You've heard the stories. How he fought, how he roared, how he turned boys into warriors with just a look. But let me tell you about his laugh.
There was a pause, like the fire itself leaned in to listen.
Obadele laughed like the gods owed him nothing and he didn't care. Loud, careless, alive. He could split a battlefield in two, and I saw it do just that. Like at Ogun River.
They were cornered, cut off from retreat, the river to their backs, the Ibadan muskets clicking in the bush ahead. The water was high from the rains, thick with mud and mosquitoes. The air stank of fear. Men whispered final prayers. And then Orbadele waded into the river, waist deep, machete lifted over his head like a flag of defiance.
Tell Sango I'll be late for supper.
He bellowed, and then he laughed. The sound was ridiculous, beautiful, alive, the kind of laugh that slapped fear in the face and dared it to stay. And for a moment, just a moment, that laugh made us believe we'd already won. We fought harder, not because we were braver, but because Orbadele reminded us what it meant to feel human, even in the face of death.
That laugh kept us alive more than his machete ever did.
He reached for his cup again, then paused to peel down the neckline of his tunic. A network of scars ran like forgotten rivers across his chest and shoulder.
This one, yes, 7. A blade meant for Obadele found me instead. He dragged me out of the mud, called me a lazy tortoise, and fed me enough palm wine to forget the pain. I couldn't lift my left arm for weeks. You know, he was even louder off the battlefield. Couldn't sit through a meal without teasing someone. Obadele once dared him to shout, "Ibadan girls are overrated," in the middle of an Ibadan camp. He did. Got chased for 3 days. But Obadele wasn't just bold. He was kind. Gave up his food more than once for boys who hadn't eaten. Shared his firewood. Let the young ones sleep close when the night got too cold.
He looked up then, meeting the young man's eyes for the first time in a while.
That's what people forget. They remember the warrior, not the man. But we, those of us who bled beside him, we remember both. 16 years of fire, of losing friends you didn't even have time to mourn. And still, somehow, we carried on. Because of people like him. Don't just write about how many people died. Write about how we lived, how we laughed, even when there was nothing left but dust and ache.
The young man nodded slowly, blinking harder than he meant to. Outside, the drumbeat faded, but its echo stayed behind, deep in the bones of the old man, and now in the heart of someone new. And far from the flickering hut, the fire that Orbadele sparked burned still. The wind was still. Even the birds seemed to know what kind of morning it was, the kind that didn't begin with song, but with silence. The sky above the river was a sheet of gray, pulled tight over the heads of men who had stopped counting how many battles they'd fought. The trees stood like tall, tired sentinels. Mist hung low over the Ogun River, curling at the feet of warriors waiting with clenched jaws and shallow breath. Orbadele stood at the front. Barefoot, dust rising with every shift of his weight, his machete strapped across his back, and eyes fixed on the opposite bank where the Fulani cavalry stirred behind a line of drummers. And smoke. He didn't blink. Not once. Behind him, the Ekiti-Parapo warriors gathered in clusters, some sitting, others sharpening blades. They didn't speak much. There was nothing left to say. 16 years of war had stolen most words from them. All that remained now was movement. Kola stood to Orbadele's right, nervously fiddling with a musket.
Last battle, you think? Every battle is the last, until it isn't. How poetic. I should have stayed a drummer.
Orbadele smirked slightly. Then the Fulani general appeared. Alhaji Dan Musa, tall and robed in white. His horse was black as coal, eyes wild with the scent of conflict. And from where Orbadele stood, He could see the confidence on the man's face.
He thinks we're tired.
Aren't we?
Orbadele didn't answer. He stepped forward, his voice steady.
They've pushed. We've bled. But this is our line. No further.
The warriors nodded, silently drawing breath, drawing strength. And then came the horn. The Fulani charged. Hooves pounded, muskets fired. The ground seemed to tremble with the weight of it all. Orbadele raised his hand, still calm, still watching. He waited until the cavalry was nearly at the river's edge, then dropped his arm.
Ow!
The traps sprang. From behind shrubs and dug-out mud walls, spearmen rose. Archers let fly. Hidden pits claimed horses and riders alike. The riverbank turned chaotic in seconds, with dust and screams rising together like smoke. Orbadele didn't rush in. Not yet. He watched the confusion take hold, the Fulani formation collapse into splinters. Then, with a nod to Kola, he sprinted forward, machete drawn, feet barely touching the earth. They clashed at the water's edge. The Fulani fought fiercely, their curved swords slashing with skill and anger. But Orbadele was everywhere, dodging, striking, calling commands. His movements weren't graceful. They were deliberate, sharp, like a drumbeat that refused to miss a note. Kola fought beside him, yelling, bleeding, somehow still making jokes.
Tell my mother I love her.
Laughter rippled, even through the chaos. That was always Orbadele's power, turning fear into fire. And then, Orbadele saw him. Dan Musa had dismounted, his robes stained, his face grim. He pushed through his men, blade in hand, eyes locked on the Yoruba warrior who had haunted his sleep for years. Orbadele met him halfway. They circled each other, blades raised, muscles tense.
You're persistent. You could have bowed and lived.
You fought well, brother. But this land is ours.
Their blades clashed, once, twice, again. Sparks flew. It wasn't the longest fight of the war, but it was the one men would speak of long after the blood had dried. Back and forth, steel rang like ancestral bells. Then, an opening. Musa lunged. Orbadele stepped aside and slammed the hilt of his machete into the back of the Fulani's knee. Musa stumbled. Orbadele pressed forward, blade to throat. But he didn't kill him.
Go! Take your men. Go home.
For a moment, Musa didn't move. Then he dropped his sword into the mud and nodded once, defeated. Alive. The Fulani began to retreat. Slow at first, then faster. Their banners fell, their horns silenced. And as they vanished into the trees, Orbadele stood tall, shoulders heavy, laughter bubbling up from his chest. Not mocking, but victorious. It echoed across the battlefield like thunder after drought. The war was over, or as close to over as such a war could be. Orbadele sat beneath a scorched palm tree, body caked in sweat and blood that wasn't all his. Around him, the warriors, what was left of them, lay in small groups, tending wounds, wrapping arms around each other in quiet disbelief. Some cried, others sang softly. voices hoarse but steady. Orbadale closed his eyes, and then Kola flopped beside him, groaning loudly.
I have sand in places saying no sand should be. You're alive, aren't you? Barely. 16 years of this, and you're still grinning like a festival goat.
They sat in silence, watching as warriors shared food, as an old woman kissed her son's cracked forehead. A young boy approached Orbadale shyly, holding out a calabash of water. Orbadale took it gently and drank.
What is your name?
Akin.
The boy whispered.
Then Akin, learn the songs of today. Not the ones about dying, the ones about living.
The boy smiled, then ran off. Smoke rose from cooking fires, not from burning huts. Hands built tents instead of tearing them down. Baskets were filled with yams, not bodies. For the first time in years, the air didn't carry fear. It carried something new, hope. And so, with wounds open and hearts heavier than any blade, they began again. Orbadale leaned back, looking at the bruised sky above them. "Let them write what they want," he murmured. "But we wrote this land with blood and breath, and now we breathe." The ash was still warm in some corners of the battlefield, but the land had already begun to heal. The war was over, not with fanfare, not with a horn, but with the slow, almost reluctant hush that comes after too many years of noise. And so the village, once hollowed by fire, began to fill itself again, one nail, one thatch, one planted seed at a time. Orbadale walked its footpaths now not as a warrior, but as a man who had lived long enough to see silence return. He passed rebuilt compounds where children raced through yam mounds, where laughter returned to mortar rhythms, where men no longer watched the horizon with swords in their hands. He greeted elders, some bent with age, others with memory. He passed Kola, who now kept goats and told exaggerated war stories to anyone foolish enough to sit still. The scars were still there. A crack down the side of the shrine wall, a field where no cassava would grow, still too soaked in old blood. But the air no longer smelled like smoke. It smelled like firewood and palm oil and wet earth after rain. Orbadale sat on a carved stool near the center of the compound, shaded by a lean neem tree, his white wrapper folded neatly around his legs. He was older now, beard streaked with gray, shoulders still strong but slower to rise. His machete no longer hung at his waist. It rested, retired, above his doorway like a relic. Still sharp, but at peace. He watched the children. 3 of them played near the fire pit, waving carved wooden swords and arguing over who got to be Orbadale in their pretend war. One boy, Akin, the same one who once offered him water after the final battle, stood taller now, more serious. He held a small carved figure in his hand.
It's you. I carved it from Iroko wood.
Orbadale turned the figure over in his hand. It was crude, but clear. The wide stance, the upturned machete, the etched lines of war paint on the face. A younger version of himself, frozen in mid-roar. He smiled.
16 years changed Yoruba land and me. But the drums, they never stopped.
That night, the baobab tree wore its finest robe, woven lanterns hanging from its limbs, women tying fresh cloths along its base, musicians tuning their drums with spits of fire and palm oil. The war was not the story of the night. Survival was. The dance began slowly, a call and response between drum and dancer. The bata answered the talking drum. The feet of women answered the call of ancestors. Children mimicked steps they didn't yet understand. The men, older now, clapped in sync, slower, with reverence. Elder Adebayo sat beside Orbadele, both of them wrapped in the kind of silence only old warriors could share.
That's Foleke's niece. Took over her auntie's healing practice. Said she wants to open a school. Good. We need more builders now than we need fighters. And him. Kofi. His father died in Ibadan. But the boy helps with farming, carpentry, even goat herding. Might lead this village one day. Young feet, old earth. Sounds like a proverb. But don't ask me to dance.
Laughter bubbled up around them, not loud, but full, as families gathered to tell stories in that sacred space where memory and myth became the same thing. A young woman stood near the fire. She was not tall, but she stood like someone whose roots ran deep. Amina, the widow of a fallen warrior, had become one of the village's architects, organizing grain storage, leading roofing efforts, even coordinating the water-sharing system during the last dry season. Tonight, she wore blue, her braids laced with cowries, her face painted with soft clay patterns that told her story. She stepped into the circle, not to dance, but to speak.
Tonight, we honor not just those who fought, but those who remembered. Those who built again. Those who taught the next breath to come easier than the last. Obadale was a man, not a god. But he fought with the heart of one. Not just with his blade, but with his laughter and his love.
As the fire burned lower, the dance slowed. Some children were asleep on their mothers' backs. A few older men leaned against each other, murmuring about the old days, about raids and rice wine, and the madness of youth. The talking drum shifted to a lower rhythm, a heartbeat echo that pulsed like the soul of the land itself. Orbadele stood. He walked slowly to the base of the baobab tree and touched its bark. His palm lingered. This tree had stood before him. It would stand long after. He turned back and looked at the people. His people. They were eating, laughing, rebuilding, storytelling, living. Not because the war hadn't broken them, but because it didn't end them. At the edge of the village, where the last of the lanterns faded, the land stretched wide and golden beneath the dying sun. From hilltop to riverbed, from shrine stone to yam mound, the Yoruba land breathed like a giant exhale, slow, tired, but whole. A group of young boys raced across the footpath, wooden spears in hand, arguing about battle formations they'd never need to use. Their shadows stretched long behind them. The wind picked up slightly, brushing through the trees like a drum roll. And then, silence. But not empty silence. Rested silence. The kind that follows when a people have sung and danced and told their story. The kind of silence that knows the drums will always beat again. Somewhere, someday, someone would remember. Orbadale sat beneath the stars now, a boy asleep beside him, the carved Iroko figure still resting in his lap. He looked out toward the horizon, a slow smile blooming beneath tired eyes. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The drums had said enough, and they endured.